Stephen A. Smith said black people can relate to Donald Trump. D.L. Hughley heard that, and he had one thing to say.
That is why black people don't take you very seriously. That's why, that very reason. If your head were any further of white people's ass, you would have to be an enema.
Yeah, he went there. And honestly, after what Stephen A. said, a lot of people feel like he earned every word of it. Today, we're breaking down exactly what Stephen A. Smith said, why D.L. Hughley called him out so hard, and the question that nobody in sports media wants to answer. Can black people actually relate to Donald Trump? Let's get into it. Before we get into D.L. Hughley's response, you need to hear exactly what Stephen A. Smith said, because context matters here. Stephen A. made two separate arguments, and this is important because they contradict each other in a way that D.L. Hughley absolutely destroys later. Argument number one.
This is Stephen A. Smith.
But I got to tell you something. As much as people may have been abhorred by Donald Trump's statement weeks ago, talking about how black folks, he's hearing that black folks find him relatable because what he's going through is similar to what black Americans have gone through, he wasn't lying. He was telling the truth. When you see the law enforcement, the court system, and everything else being exercised against him, it is something that black folks throughout this nation can relate to.
This is also Stephen A. Smith.
Stephen A. said when black people see what Donald Trump is going through with the legal system, they should be able to relate to it. Because black Americans have historically been targeted by law enforcement and the courts. And Trump is being targeted the same way. On the surface, that argument has some logic to it. Some people nodded their heads at that part. Because yes, the legal system in America has a long and documented history of treating black people unfairly. But then Stephen A. made his second argument. And this is where it all fell apart.
Carmelo Anthony murdered Austin Metcalf. There is no other way to slice it. He said he put his hands on me, as in Austin Metcalf. He put his hands on me, so I stabbed him. That's not justification for killing someone.
Stephen A. Smith said Carmelo Anthony murdered Austin Metcalf. No other way to slice it. He said someone put their hands on him, so he stabbed him. And that's not justification for killing someone. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. A 34-time convicted felon, former president billionaire who had his own charity shut down for fraud, who had a fake university shut down for fraud, who appears in the Epstein files, who was found liable for sexual battery, black people can relate to him being treated unfairly by the legal system. But a 17-year-old black kid tried by an all-white jury in the South who says he was being physically attacked before he defended himself, black people cannot relate to him. That's the argument Stephen A. Smith made on national television to millions of viewers. And D.L. Hughley was not about to let that slide. Now, D.L. Hughley has been one of the most consistent voices in black media when it comes to calling out what he sees as hypocrisy. And when he saw those two Stephen A. clips side by side, he didn't hold back one single word.
So Trump, the 34-time convicted felon, who was once the president of the United States of America, and who at that time, the time when he went on his diatribe, Stephen A. went on his diatribe, was running for president again. A felon can't even vote, but he could still run as a 34-count felon. He was tried by a jury literally of his peers. In addition to that, he was found guilty of sexual battery. He appears in the Epstein list 38,500 times, which is more than Harry Potter appears in books that are named after him. He had a school that closed down because of fraud. He had his charity can't do business in New York because of fraud. He actually was able to pick some of the judges that would handle some of the other cases he was involved in. He was the most powerful man in the world. And you feel like we can relate to him because the judicial system treated him unfairly and we could relate to that. When historically has anybody who was a billionaire, who was a former president, who, was a business magnate, ever been treated fairly in America? But you feel like black people can relate to him. But Carmelo Anthony, the 17-year-old kid who was found guilty by an all-white jury in the South, we can't relate to him. We can relate to the adjudicated rapist, the people are associated with pedophile, the fraud, the felon. We can relate to him. The judicial system is unfair to him. But the 17-year-old kid who was tried by a Southern jury, an all-white Southern jury, we can't relate to him. That is why black people don't take you very seriously. That's why, that very reason. If your head were any further of white people's ass, you would have to be an enema.
Did you catch everything he just said? Because there's a lot packed in there, and I want to make sure we don't miss it. First, Hughley goes straight to the receipts on Trump. 34-time convicted felon, found guilty of sexual battery, appears in the Epstein documents. Fake university shut down for fraud. Charity shut down for fraud. Ran for president while being a convicted felon. And somehow got an unconditional discharge. No prison time, no probation, no fines. And Stephen A. Smith wants black people to relate to that experience with the legal system. Hughley's point, and it's a sharp one, is that the entire reason black people can't relate to Trump's legal situation is because Trump's legal situation is the opposite of what black people experience.
Fam, I don't think there's a black person in this country can relate to Donald Trump, anyone having 34 felonies and not spending 1 day in prison. I don't think a black person on this planet can relate to that. I do not believe that there's a black person on this planet can relate to a judge sentencing them to an unconditional discharge, meaning that they would face, and this is Trump, he faces no prison time, probation, or financial fines, despite his felony status.
Name one black person who got convicted of 34 felonies and never spent a single day in prison. Name one. I'll wait. That's the point Hughley is making. The comparison doesn't work, not even a little bit, because the defining feature of how the legal system treats black Americans is that it comes down hard. Mandatory minimums, overcrowded prisons, years taken away for things white defendants walk away from with community service. Donald Trump got convicted 34 times and went right back to the White House. That's not something black America can relate to. That's the exact opposite of what black America experiences. But here's the part of this conversation that I think hits the hardest, because it's not just about Trump. It's about what Stephen A. said about Carmelo Anthony in the same breath. A 17-year-old kid from Texas who says he was being physically bullied repeatedly by someone bigger than him, who on the day in question says that person put hands on him first. And Stephen A. Smith's verdict, delivered confidently on national television, is that Carmelo Anthony is a murderer. No other way to slice it.
He talks about trying to make the connection between black folks and the legal system. Black folks say, yeah, you know, some of the black slogans. Yeah, I can relate to that, man. Legal system do be tripping on us, man. So that's why we need to protect Donald Trump. And then he goes in and double down on Carmelo Anthony being a murderer. Why would Stephen A. be speaking about something like this anyway? I thought he was a sports journalist. I thought he was a commentator or something like that.
D.L. Hughley's response to this is worth sitting with. He asks, why is Stephen A. Smith even talking about this? He's a sports journalist, a commentator. That's his lane. That's what ESPN hired him for. But somewhere along the way, Stephen A. Smith became the go-to voice on black issues for a certain type of mainstream media. And Hughley has a very specific theory about why that happened.
I know that ESPN didn't hire him for that. Initially, I think what happened is, once he got in and he spoke on a couple of things, the people at ESPN was like, man, he ain't gotta really say nothing. We can just let Stephen say it. Hey, Steve, get in here, boy. Yes, master. Yes, boss. Yes, boss. Listen, from now on, anything we want to say about the blacks, we're gonna need you to say it. You got that, boy? Yes, boss. Yes, boss. But yeah, One question, boss. Will I be compensated? Oh, of course you'll be compensated, but pay you well. We always pay the good Negroes well to talk about their own people. Have you looked around? We pay them very well. We pay very well for blacks to throw the blacks under the bus. Just look around.
Now look, that's a hard thing to say. That's a charge that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. But Hughley's argument is this. When you consistently take positions that benefit one side, when you tell black audiences to relate to a billionaire felon while calling a 17-year-old black kid a murderer, at some point you have to ask whose interest you're actually serving. And that's not a question that has an easy answer, but it's a question that deserves to be asked. Now let's spend some real time on the Trump comparison, because I want to be fair here. I want to steelman Stephen A's argument before we take it apart. The argument is black Americans have been historically persecuted by the legal system. Donald Trump is being persecuted by the legal system. Therefore, there's a commonality. There's something to relate to. On paper, that has some surface level logic, but here's where it completely breaks down.
Meaning that they would face, and this is Trump, he faces no prison time, probation, or financial fines, despite his felony status. Give me one black person who can relate to that. Anybody ever been through something like that? Is there a black person in the world who's ever been right now living today? Can anybody point to one black person who has been through something like that, had 34 felonies, hell, 10 felonies, 5 felonies, and they spent one day in prison, convicted? Now, I ain't say just having them. I'm not saying accused. I'm saying convicted, and didn't spend one day in jail? That don't sound right. That don't sound right.
The way the legal system treats black Americans is characterized by severity, by harshness, by sentences that go far beyond what the crime warrants, by judges who don't give the benefit of the doubt, by juries that convict on less evidence. The way the legal system treated Donald Trump is characterized by leniency, by protection, by a judge giving him an unconditional discharge after 34 convictions, by being able to attack the judge on social media and face zero consequences, by ignoring gag orders and walking out of the courthouse to hold press conferences.
It was his subsequent behavior throughout his various indictments. Trump routinely launched aggressive public attacks against the judge and the prosecutors. Yeah, and their families. And he was never held in contempt of court. You know, he ignored gag orders. He didn't give a damn. He just did whatever he wanted to do. Judge told him, hey man, don't do that again. And he just did it again. He leave the courthouse and go straight to social media and start bragging the judge. What black person can relate to that? What black person you know can relate to ignoring a judge's orders, ignoring the judge's gag orders, being held in contempt of court several times, but not ever actually having to be arrested, being warned about going in a contempt of court? What black person you know has launched attacks on the judge, the prosecutor, and their families, and was never held in contempt of court?
Hughley breaks this down perfectly. What black person do you know has ever been able to attack a judge and the judge's family publicly, repeatedly, and not been arrested, not been held in contempt, not been thrown in jail for violating court orders? What black defendant do you know walks out of a courthouse after being found guilty, goes straight to social media, drags the prosecutor, and faces zero consequences for it? That's not relating to the black experience with the legal system. That's the opposite of the black experience with the legal system. And Stephen A. Smith, who is smart enough to know this, chose to make that argument anyway. Which brings us to the biggest question of this whole conversation. Why? D.L. Hughley used a word that I want to address directly. He called Stephen A. Smith a mole. Now that's a strong word, and I'm not here to tell you whether that's fair or not. That's for you to decide. But what Hughley's argument actually is underneath the strong language is something worth thinking about seriously.
Thumbs out if you say, hell no, man, I was born in the morning, but not this morning. Family. See, this is what I mean by these moles, like Stephen A., who will say some halves truths, right? He say some things that people will generally agree with, and then they let them get away with all of the other BS that they say, right? He glazed Donald Trump. He talks about trying to make the connection between black folks and the legal system. Black folks say, yeah, you know, some of the black slogans. Yeah, I can relate to that, man. The legal system do be tripping on us, man. So that's why we need to protect Donald Trump.
He says Stephen A. operates by saying things that black audiences will generally agree with the stuff that's obviously true, and then using that credibility to sneak in the things that don't hold up. He gets you nodding your head on the legal system stuff. And while you're nodding, he slips in the part about Carmelo Anthony being a murderer. He slips in the part about relating to Trump. And because you already agreed with him on the first part, some people let the second part slide. That's not an accident. That's a skill. And Hughley is saying when you use that skill consistently in one direction, you have to ask who benefits.
Stephen is working for Team White Supremacy. He knows exactly what he's doing. But Stephen tried to play both sides of the fence. He thinks his proximity to blackness gives him an automatic pass. And some people do give him a pass just because he's black. But if you take away that color and you look at Stephen A., if a white man was saying the exact same thing that Stephen A. says, wouldn't none of the black, well, just to sum up work, because boy, you got something out there like that. But most of the black people who mess with him wouldn't mess with him at all. They wouldn't rock with him at all. And I'll go a step further. If Kanye West was white, black people would have been stopped messing with him the moment he said slavery was a choice. They would have never touched him again. But because of that color, he's able to hover above the radar. Below the radar. He's able to go up below the radar.
And then Hughley makes a comparison that really stuck with me. He talks about Kanye West, and he says, if Kanye West were white, black people would have cut him off the moment he said slavery was a choice. But because he's black, he gets a pass from some people just based on skin color alone. And Hughley's saying the same thing applies to Stephen A. If a white commentator was saying exactly what Stephen A. says, most of the black audience that currently messes with Stephen A. would not rock with him at all. The color gives him access, and then he uses that access to say things that a white commentator couldn't get away with saying. Whether you agree with that assessment or not, it's a serious argument that deserves a serious response. Here's what makes this whole situation complicated, though. D.L. Hughley himself admits he doesn't even like addressing Stephen A. Smith. He says Stephen A. is not worth his time, but...
The dude is a mo. Yeah, I try not even to address Stephen A. because he's really not worth my time. But his message is big because his voice is big and it's loud. And if we don't have a counter argument to stuff that he says, then his message will be louder. His message will be even louder than what it is already. So there has to be a balanced attack. There has to be a balanced attack. There has to be an answer to this ridiculous stuff that he spews.
Stephen A. Smith has one of the biggest platforms in sports media. Millions of viewers, daily presence on ESPN, social media reach that most commentators would kill for. And when someone with that kind of reach says something, when they say it confidently and repeatedly to that many people, it shapes how people think, especially younger black viewers who maybe don't have the historical context to push back on it themselves. That's why Hughley feels like he has to respond, not because Stephen A deserves the attention, but because if nobody counters it, the message just sits there and grows. And that's actually something worth thinking about, regardless of where you land on this specific debate. Because this is how narratives get built, not through one big lie, but through a series of half-truths that go unchallenged long enough to feel like the full story. Here's what this whole conversation comes down to. Stephen A. Smith asked Black America to see themselves in Donald Trump, in a man who got convicted 34 times and never spent a day in jail, in a man who attacked judges and their families on social media with zero consequences, in a man who got an unconditional discharge after being found guilty of sexual battery, and in the same breath told Black America they cannot relate to a 17-year-old kid tried by an all-white jury in the South for defending himself from someone physically attacking him. D.L. Hughley heard that, and he said with everything he had, no.
Who was tried by a Southern jury, an all-white Southern jury, we can't relate to him. That is why black people don't take you very seriously. That's why, that very reason. If your head were any further of white people's ass, you would have to be an enema. If your head was any further up white people's ass, you would have to be an enema. Ours.
Now, you might agree with Hughley. You might think he went too far. You might think Stephen A had some valid points buried in there somewhere. All of that is a conversation worth having. But what's not up for debate is this. When you tell Black America to relate to the man who faced 34 felonies and walked free, while telling them not to relate to the 17-year-old black kid tried by an all-white Southern jury, you better be ready for people to ask whose side you're really on. Drop in the comments, do you think D.L. Hughley was right to blast Stephen A like that? Or did he go too far? And subscribe, because this conversation is just getting started.